Hello and welcome to Mora Voces. In this video, we're going to talk about single note neumes. We're going to talk about the virga, the tractulus, the punctum, and the stropha. We're going to focus mostly on those neumes from the St. Gall family, but we will talk a little bit about those from the Metz family, specifically from the manuscript of Leon 239. I hope that this video kind of helps demystify the single note neumes that you find in either your Graduale Triplex or your Graduale Novum. I really hope that you can feel more comfortable after watching this video in being able to decipher those neumes. So let's get started. The first neume we have is the virga. If you take a pen, preferably not a pencil, and you start in a lower corner and you just stroke up, that's all the virga is. It's a single note, higher note. It's contextual though. So we don't know how much higher the second and the third virga are from that first virga in our example here, St. Gall 390, which is also called Hartker manuscript. We only know that some virgas refer to those notes that come before it, and some virgas refer to those notes that come after it. If you look at the square note notation that I have provided for you below in yellow, you will see that those virgas are higher than the notes that follow it. And the ones that I have highlighted in green are higher than the ones that precede it. We have to rely on later manuscripts in order to understand the precise pitch indication. Usually those manuscripts will have come a couple hundred years afterwards. Montpellier is a really, really famous manuscript because it gave both the names of the notes as well as other indications. So it was sort of like, it helped us unlock a lot of these Gregorian melodies, but that's a little bit of a sidetrack. It's kind of like a Rosetta Stone. You'll also notice here that I have put in purple below in the square note notation what looks like a hammer. Don't worry, it's not a hammer. There's no violence going on, it's just an ephesema. An ephesema is a fancy term that means to pull, to tug onto, to emphasize, to put some weight to hold to some degree. I can't tell you you're gonna hold this for twice as long or 3 times as long because we don't know. And again, this is also contextual. Its placement is based on where it is, not its placement. Its value is based on where it is within the chant, where it is within the word, which syllable it falls on. A lot of factors that we have to take into consideration when thinking about epizemas. In this example, the notator wanted to let the singer know or remind the singer that they need to make sure that that tonic accent, that principal accent on tere, should get some weight. Naturally, because we're coming to the end of an incisive clause right there, we're going to elongate re, right? I mean, you can look in the example above from Hartker. There is no vertical line telling you, oh, we need to pause here. But this is a stylized melody. It was used for, I think, 100 different antiphons, slightly adjusted. So they knew this melody really well. This was just a reminder, don't forget that. Make sure that gets the necessary emphasis it deserves. The next point I have below says RT, that just stands for reciting tone, which means you have the same pitch that's sung on different syllables over and over. So in the square note notation, you'll see that we have do on a, num, and do. This is a very imperfect example, but you get the idea there. Since that reciting tone is approached from below, that virga is going to just indicate, hey, we're singing the same note. Also, I did forget to mention, St. Gall, the notators of St. Gall prefer the virga. If you have a single note neume, they are going to revert more to a virga than to a tractulus. It was just their preference. Honestly, probably it was faster. Think about it. You had a fountain pen or something like a fountain pen, right? It's a lot easier just to stroke, 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 stroke. I'm going to sing this example for you so you get an idea of the different virgas, which there is no difference except for the episema in terms of duration. But you can see, sort of follow along here with all the different signs, what's going on there. Abite animum Domine, Dominatorem terra, de pedra deserti, ad montem filiasion. Right, now that you have an idea of the virga, we're going to go on to its cousin, the tractulus. Tractulus is like the inverse of a virga. It is a single note lower note. And you'll see that I've highlighted it. I've taken the same example, I've highlighted it in blue there. It's also contextual. So if you're looking at Hartker, which again I have reproduced below, you're not going to know how much below the previous note that tractulus is going to be. Is it going to be 2 notes? Is it 3 notes below? We don't know. It's all contextual. All we know is that it's some sort of lower note. The other thing to note is if you have a reciting tone that's approached from above, and then you have the same pitch over and over and over, you will see a tractulus instead of a virga. What's critical to note is that these are both diacritical signs, and yes, that pun was all intended. A diacritical sign is just a fancy word that means that these were used originally in the art of oration. When, for centuries before that, when you'd have public figures give speeches, they would mark when their voices would go higher and then drop low. It was a theatrical show. And so when scribes began to notate this music, they used something that they already were aware of, and they just used it in a different context, appropriated it to a different context. But this shows that fundamentally this music was conceived of as text being given life through melody. And you have this idea too of an oral tradition being passed on, right? I mean, for centuries before the advent of notation, all of this chant was passed on by oral tradition, and we lost something in our notation. But it's still fascinating, all of those parallels that went on between them. All right, let's go on. We're going to next look at the stropha. You look at that example I've taken from Einsiedeln 121, which also is from the St. Gall family. It's one of famous manuscripts. On that word to dixit, you'll see what look like apostrophes. And yes, it comes from the same root. Stropha is a singular, strophe, plural, so multiple apostrophes. 2 repercussions, bistropha, 3, tristropha, 4, we just say those are in groups of 2s or in groups of 3s. A stropha is like a small pulsation. So it's when you can almost think of it not quite like a bird trill and not quite an emphatic pulse with your stomach, but there is like a slight pulse with the stomach. Again, it's not heavy, but it's light. It sparkles. What's also really important to note is that the last note in each group is always emphasized. Sometimes the notators of St. Gall will show us this. This is the example that we have there, also taken from Einsiedeln. On folio 227, you'll see that there's been an episema added to that last stropha there. But a lot of the time, it won't be notated in St. Gall. On the other hand, in Leon 239, there below, you'll see that you have that same tristropha, but that last group looks like it almost has a tail, and there's a T above it. The T stands for tenete, which means to hold. And so Leon was very explicit. You must hold that last grouping, that last note in the grouping ever so slightly. And then we apply that to St. Gall, because these 2 different manuscript families were born at about the same time. So we get different information from each of the families, and we put it together to create our melodic reconstructions, which is, I think, really, really cool. I thought I would sing this example, Tibi Dixit Cod Meum, just a little bit. This is taken from Lent. Very imperfectly sung, but that gives you an idea. They're light. They're meant to be light. If instead you saw maybe 2 virga in a row over a single syllable, those would get a little more weight. And if those had apozemas added to them, so they looked like 2 hammers in a row, those would receive even more weight. We don't have that here. We have strophe. And lastly, we're going to talk a little bit about the punctum. And here we're going to pivot. So we're going to talk a little bit more about Leon and Metz notation. And at this point, you may be wondering, why in the world are we going to be talking about Metz notation? I thought that we were going to be learning St. Gall notation. Calm down, it's going to be okay. We need to talk just a little bit about Metz notation in order to better understand a couple of the other concepts. And trust me, from here on out, we're going to mostly be focusing on St. Gall. In St. Gall, the punctum is not found in isolation. I think except in Bomberg. We're not going to worry about Bomberg. It's always light. So it's always found in combination, which means that it's found with other neumes on the same syllable, as you can see below from one of the verses from St. Gall 359, the cantatorium, the famous cantatorium. You'll see there. Instead, if we look over at Leon 239, we have the example Videns Dominus, which is also another one of my favorite chants taken from Lent. You'll see that for the first part of this antiphon, Leon uses puncti. Videns Dominus falendens monumentum. Except there's an uncinus with a tenete on fle of flentes. And then from monumentum, you see more uncini. So just as the virga is the default neume for St. Gall, the uncinus is the default neume for the Messine notation for Metz. What's really cool, I think, is that you have different size uncini. If you look really closely at this manuscript, you can see how certain uncini are longer than others. Most of the waves, the uncini look like a wave. And you can see some of them are shorter, some of them are longer. So this in and of itself proves that this repertoire wasn't conceived in a rhythmic group of 2 or 3, because the uncini always stand for a single note neume. And you have at least 5 variations of the uncini for what St. Gall notators give as either a tractulus or a virga. So you can't draw that conclusion because 5 different notations can't somehow have the same value as a single virga from St. Gall. So this proves that this music was conceived of from the word itself, from the text. From the text, these melodies were born. Just so cool. So there was no concept of menstrualism, of 2s and 3s. That's neither here nor there right now. Over Videns Dominus, you see plenty of puncti. If you look down at the square notation, which I've reproduced from Einsiedeln 121, St. Gall family, you will see that they have used virga, and then there's one tractulus on mono right there. If you look really carefully, you can see it. By having these light puncti, this proves that the default neumes of the virga and the tractuli are light. They're not heavy. In this case, we have the puncti to set up the rest of the drama that will unfold. This is when Jesus raises Lazarus. And it's a really powerful moment in scripture. We can almost hear that coming from the music itself. I'll sing a little bit. Videns Dominus flentens sorores monumentum lacrimatus est coram Iudaeis et clamamant. Leave you on a cliffhanger there. So you see there how we have an uncinus on flentis, and if you look at the square note notation, you have the hammer again, our famous virga with the epizema that shows up. So there is a distinction being made there. They want to show that flentes, the Lord himself, was weeping, and he saw, well, in this case, he saw the sisters of Lazarus weeping. He cried out later, lacrimatus. Sorry, my Latin isn't perfect. But they wanted to underscore that idea of crying and weeping. So you have that important word melody pointed out there on flentes. I hope that this gives you an overview of the single note Neumes. If you have any questions, please post them in the comment box or shoot me an email. I love to talk about chant. I would love to connect with you. I would love to answer any of your questions. Thank you so much for